Yeah, the thing I find most tricky is when people don't recognize you particularly, but how.
For more than 3 decades, Rowan Atkinson, better known to the world as Mr. Bean, has been one of the most iconic comedic figures on the planet. With barely a word spoken, and armed only with a rubbery face and unmatched physical timing, Mr. Bean became a global phenomenon. Children adored him. Adults admired him. And the character's silent mischief became a universal language that crossed every border, culture, and generation. But behind the quirky grin and childlike innocence of Mr. Bean, Rowan Atkinson spent most of his life hiding something far more complicated, something fans had quietly suspected for years but were never able to confirm. And now, at 70, he's finally addressing it, openly, honestly, and with a vulnerability the world has rarely seen from him. The truth is, Rowan's relationship with Mr. Bean has always been deeply conflicted. The character that made him a superstar also became the very thing that trapped him, overshadowed him, and shaped painful parts of his personal life. The fame was overwhelming. The expectations were suffocating. And the immense pressure to keep being Mr. Bean, even long after he outgrew the character, left emotional scars he carried in silence. Now, at 70, Rowan is finally sharing what fans had long suspected, and it's far more heartbreaking, revealing, and surprising than anyone imagined. His confession shatters the myth of the carefree comedian and uncovers the truth of a man who spent decades balancing public laughter with private struggle. What did Rowan Atkinson reveal about the character that defined, and nearly consumed, his entire life? Long before the world knew him as Mr. Bean, Rowan Atkinson simply wanted to be an actor, a serious actor. He studied engineering at Oxford, but it was the stage that called to him. He dreamed of performing intelligent comedy, sharp satire, and character-driven sketches. And for a time, that dream was real. He became known for his brilliant work on Not the 9 O'Clock News and later the hugely acclaimed Blackadder series. His humor was clever, sophisticated, and layered. But then came a quirky, nearly silent misfit named Mr. Bean, originally intended as a small, experimental character he planned to use only occasionally. Instead, it became the role that changed everything. At first, Rowan enjoyed the success. Mr. Bean was unlike anything on television. Families gathered to watch it. Children adored it. International audiences embraced it instantly because it didn't rely on language. But as the character exploded into a worldwide phenomenon, something inside Rowan began to shift. The public no longer saw Rowan Atkinson, the versatile actor. They saw only Mr. Bean, the childish, bumbling oddball. And that was the beginning of the conflict he carried for decades. By his early 40s, Rowan felt suffocated by the character's popularity. Every interview, every event, every public appearance revolved around Mr. Bean. Film studios didn't want Rowan Atkinson, they wanted Bean. It didn't matter that he had a sharp mind for political satire or impeccable timing in verbal comedy. The entertainment industry, and even much of the audience, refused to let him be anything else. Rowan once admitted privately to colleagues that he feared he would die as Bean, not as Rowan. But the emotional weight went deeper than career frustration. Because Mr. Bean required extreme physical comedy and exhausting facial contortions, Rowan pushed his body to its limits. Episodes that seemed light and whimsical to viewers required hours of demanding physical work. And behind the camera, Rowan struggled with intense self-consciousness. Few fans realize that he has lived most of his life dealing with a stutter, a condition that shaped his anxiety and made comedic silence feel safer than dialogue-heavy roles. The tragedy, however, wasn't the character itself, it was the way the world refused to separate the man from the role. Children would run up to him expecting Bean-like antics. Adults asked him to make funny faces. Even strangers in restaurants would whisper or laugh, waiting for him to trip, spill something, or behave awkwardly, as if he was the character. Rowan once described it as living in a costume that I couldn't take off. He also knew the truth fans had long suspected. He no longer enjoyed playing Mr. Bean. Not fully. Not freely. not without feeling trapped. Yet he continued for years out of obligation, because the world loved Bean so deeply that he felt guilty letting him go. Only now, at 70 years old, is Rowan finally willing to reveal the emotional toll the character took on him and why his relationship with Mr. Bean is far more painful, complicated, and bittersweet than anyone imagined. As Mr. Bean grew into a global juggernaut, Rowan Atkinson's life changed in ways he never expected, and not always for the better. Fame arrived fast, loud, and overwhelming. The character he had created with innocent intentions suddenly became a worldwide icon. Every country, every language, every generation embraced him. It should have been exhilarating. But for Rowan, it quickly turned suffocating. Fame on that scale eliminates privacy. Wherever Rowan went, airports, hotels, restaurants, even quiet vacations, people recognized him instantly. And they didn't want Rowan. They wanted the silly, bumbling, childish man he played on screen. In public, he was constantly asked to do the face, act like Bean, or pretend to fall. People grabbed at him for photos, laughed before he spoke, and expected him to behave like a cartoon come to life. He once said quietly to a friend, "It's lonely being famous for something that isn't really you." This loneliness only grew heavier. Rowan is naturally private, introverted, and fiercely protective of his dignity. Yet the world treated him like a walking circus act, an endless fountain of slapstick comedy. Even in award shows and interviews, hosts often mocked Mr. Bean rather than celebrate Rowan's artistry. Other actors were complimented for depth and emotional range. Rowan was asked to wiggle his eyebrows. But the emotional toll didn't stop there. Behind the scenes, Rowan was battling crippling anxiety, something that began in childhood and intensified with age. The pressure to maintain the physical comedy of Mr. Bean became mentally draining. Before every performance, he felt the weight of millions of expectations on his shoulders. The stakes were impossibly high. If he messed up? If Bean wasn't funny enough? If people stopped laughing? He felt he would fail, not just himself, but the entire world that adored the character. As he entered his late 50s, the role became physically painful. The exaggerated expressions, the falls, the jerky movements, Bean demanded an athleticism Rowan could no longer sustain without consequence. His neck and jaw often ached after shoots. His back suffered from years of stunts. But fans never saw the toll it took. They only saw the laughter. Even worse, the character began to overshadow other parts of his life. Producers dismissed him for serious roles, saying, "Audiences won't see anyone but Bean." Directors hesitated to cast him in dramatic films. Studio executives pushed him to create more Bean content even when he was emotionally exhausted by it. Rowan felt trapped between gratitude and resentment. Grateful that Mr. Bean gave him worldwide recognition. Resentful that the same fame prevented him from evolving. But perhaps the most heartbreaking part of this chapter was the effect fame had on his personal relationships. His long marriage eventually crumbled, in part because constant public attention made normal life impossible. Paparazzi followed him relentlessly. His children struggled to understand why strangers always stared, laughed, or expected their father to perform on command. He felt guilty for the stress they endured simply because he was recognizably Mr. Bean. And through it all, Rowan stayed silent, never complaining, never revealing the internal battle he was fighting. Only now, at 70, is he finally willing to explain the truth. Mr. Bean brought him joy, but he also cost him more than the world ever knew. What fans never realized, because Rowan Atkinson was too private and too protective to ever admit it publicly, was that the success of Mr. Bean came during some of the most emotionally challenging years of his life. Behind the physical comedy and silent mischief, Rowan struggled through a series of deeply personal battles that shaped the man he eventually became. One of the most painful struggles was his lifelong battle with self-doubt. Despite his fame, Rowan never fully believed he was good enough. Growing up with a speech disorder left him hyper-aware of how people perceived him. Even as an adult, even after worldwide success, Rowan carried the insecurities of a child who once feared speaking in front of a classroom. While audiences saw him as fearless, the truth was the opposite. Rowan meticulously rehearsed every movement, every expression, every comedic beat because he was terrified of failing. The irony was cruel: he was adored by millions, yet constantly questioning himself. Then came the emotional strain of his marriage falling apart. Rowan had built his life around keeping his family shielded from fame, but fame is a storm that never truly stops. His growing international schedule kept him away for long stretches. The non-stop attention, the pressure, the misinterpretations from tabloids, it all took a toll. By the time the marriage ended, Rowan was devastated but silent, not wanting to turn private heartbreak into public spectacle. Friends later said he carried deep guilt over the collapse of his family life, often blaming himself even when others insisted it was simply the cost of living under constant scrutiny. But the hardest blow came from something fans had suspected for years but never confirmed until he finally spoke about it at 70. Rowan Atkinson was afraid of growing old as Mr. Bean. He feared becoming a caricature, an aging performer still forced to make silly faces for entertainment. Physical comedy becomes harder with age. The jumps, the falls, the extreme facial expressions, they were taking a toll on his body. Rowan knew deep inside that every year he waited, the harder it would become to portray the character without hurting himself. And yet, the world would not let Mr. Bean fade. Studios begged him for more. Networks offered massive contracts. Producers pushed for sequels and spin-offs. Meanwhile, routine medical checkups were beginning to show the consequences of decades of physical performance. Joint pains. Back strain. Neck stiffness. Doctors advised him to take it easy, but how does Mr. Bean take it easy? The character is physicality. Rowan also felt the emotional impact of fame's loneliness. While beloved by millions, he rarely formed new friendships. People struggled to separate the character from the man. They expected him to be fun, goofy, constantly entertaining. But Rowan was quiet. Private. Introverted. Many didn't understand him, and even fewer truly knew him. As he approached his 70th birthday, Rowan began reflecting on a life shaped by a character he both cherished and feared. He realized he had spent decades hiding behind Bean's mask, hiding pain, hiding anxiety, hiding personal struggles, hiding the exhaustion of trying to live up to the world's expectations. For the first time, Rowan allowed himself to ask a question he had avoided for years. If I take off the mask, will anyone still care about me? The answer he found led to the confession that shocked fans around the world. At 70, Rowan Atkinson finally spoke the truth. Mr. Bean brought him fame, fortune, and an unimaginable place in the hearts of millions, but the character also came with profound costs. For decades, he had balanced the laughter of the world against his private pain, often at the expense of his health, relationships, and emotional well-being. The confession revealed not just the man behind the iconic comedy, but the human story that few had seen. The most striking revelation was Rowan's admission of exhaustion, not merely physical, but emotional. Years of performing Bean required grueling physical stunts, falling, jumping, and contorting his body in ways that strained his back, neck, and joints. Each episode demanded perfection. Every public appearance carried the silent weight of expectation. And for someone who was naturally introverted and private, the constant attention became suffocating. Fame that once seemed like a blessing had become a subtle, persistent prison. Rowan also acknowledged the toll it took on his personal life. Friendships were tested by relentless work schedules, the public never letting him rest, and the constant need to perform, even in casual, private settings. His family life, while deeply cherished, bore the strain of fame's unrelenting demands. He often felt guilty for time away, for the pressures his children experienced, and for the private moments he sacrificed to uphold the public persona of Mr. Bean. Perhaps the hardest truth he revealed was the tension between love and resentment for his most famous creation. Mr. Bean gave him a legacy, yet he had spent a lifetime trying to separate the man from the character. Rowan admitted that, for years, he feared growing old, still trapped in that persona, unable to evolve as an actor or as a human being. The laughter that once felt freeing sometimes felt like chains. And yet, Rowan's story is not one of despair, it is one of resilience and acceptance. At 70, he has found peace in knowing that he can embrace both his success and his struggle. He cherishes the joy Mr. Bean brought to countless lives, while also claiming space to live as Rowan Atkinson, the man with his own voice, vulnerabilities, and desires. He continues to act, to create, and to inspire, but on his own terms. His revelation resonates because it uncovers a truth we all suspect but rarely confront, that even the most joyful, beloved figures can carry hidden battles. That laughter, while healing for the audience, does not erase the performer's pain. And that a life defined by talent and acclaim can still be filled with personal struggle and emotional complexity. Rowan Atkinson's confession is both heartbreaking and inspiring. It reminds the world that the people behind our favorite characters are human, flawed, and profoundly private. Mr. Bean may have brought laughter, but Rowan's honesty brings understanding. And at 70, he is finally free to claim the life, identity, and peace he has quietly sought for decades. The world applauds Mr. Bean. Now, it also honors Rowan Atkinson, the man who made us laugh, even when he was carrying the weight of the world inside.